You know, for the longest time, we've thought of life as, well, basically a super complex machine, right? All matter and energy. But what if that's missing the biggest piece of the puzzle? What if the real secret to life isn't in a test tube, but in a line of code? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea, that life is, first and foremost, an information system.
All right, so let's just jump right in with the million-dollar question, the one that's at the heart of this whole thing. If all the instructions for life are written down, like in a book, does that book have an author? It's a simple question, but man, it kicks off one of the most profound and fascinating debates in all of modern science.
So our story really gets going back in 1953 with the discovery of that iconic double helix structure of DNA. And this wasn't just some big discovery for biology, it was a total game changer for information theory. All of a sudden, scientists realized the cell is running on a 4-character digital code, and that completely shifted the mystery. The question wasn't just, how did life's chemistry start? It became, where did the information come from?
And this is the fundamental shift. You've got to get this part. The cell isn't just some random goop of chemicals sloshing around. No, it's an incredibly sophisticated system that stores, processes, and executes a program. Grasping this information-centered view is absolutely key, because every single argument we're about to look at is built on this foundation.
This brings us to a really critical question. Is the sequence of A's, C's, G's, and T's in our DNA, is that just a product of physics? You know, like how water always freezes into a 6-sided snowflake because of natural laws. Or is it something else entirely? A message that chemistry, on its own, just can't explain.
The physicist Michael Polanyi had a fantastic way of putting this. He said life operates under a double control. Now, what does that mean? Well, the molecules themselves, they absolutely have to obey the laws of physics and chemistry, no question. But the arrangement of those molecules, the actual information, that's like an instruction from the outside. Think about it. The physics of silicon doesn't explain the code running on a microchip. Polanyi argued the exact same thing is true for life. And get this is what makes it all work. The backbone of the DNA molecule, it literally doesn't care which letter, A, C, G, or T, gets attached to it. There's no chemical preference at all, no force pulling them into a specific, meaningful order. And that chemical indifference is what makes DNA the perfect hard drive for storing information. It's like a blank page, ready for any message to be written on it.
Okay, so this table really helps to visualize the difference here. On the left, you've got things driven by pure chemical necessity, like a salt crystal. It's all about natural law, and the result is a simple, repetitive structure. But on the right, you've got informational systems like DNA or computer software. The driving force there isn't law, it's contingency, choices between different options. The structure is incredibly complex and not repetitive at all. This really suggests they come from different kinds of places. One from internal forces, the other from an external source of information.
Okay, so this whole idea is what brings us to the main argument from philosopher of science Stephen Meyer. He proposes intelligent design, not as a religious belief, but as what he argues is a scientific conclusion. He gets there using a standard method in science called inference to the best explanation.
So the heart of his argument really boils down to this idea he calls complex specified information, or CSI for short. Let's break that down. A random string of letters, like banging on a keyboard, is complex but means nothing. A simple repeating pattern, like ABAB, is specified but it's not complex. But a meaningful sentence, now that's both complex and specified. Meyer is basically saying the code in DNA is exactly like that sentence.
And to give you an idea of just how complex we're talking about, look at this number. Meyer calculates the odds of one single functional protein forming by random chance are about 1 in 10 to the power of 164. I mean, that's a 1 followed by 164 zeros. It's a number so huge it's hard to even wrap your head around. He argues that with odds like that, just saying it happened by chance isn't a sufficient scientific answer.
So Meyer's logic goes something like this. If it wasn't pure chance, then what else could it be? He applies a simple test. He asks, in our everyday uniform experience of the world, what's the only cause we've ever seen produce large amounts of complex specified information? Whether it's computer code, a book, or a simple text message, he points out the source is always the same, an intelligent mind.
So this table kind of sums up his whole process of elimination. Chance? He says, nope, the probabilities are just astronomically against it. What about natural laws? Well, they create repeating patterns, like crystals, not complex aperiodic codes. So, in his view, that leaves just one possibility that actually has the causal power to create the effect we see: intelligent design.
It's the only cause he argues is consistent with our experience of where information comes from.
Okay, but that's one side of the argument. What's the main scientific counterproposal for a purely natural origin? Well, that would be the RNA World hypothesis. The core idea is that there was a simpler, chemical stepping stone to get to the incredibly complex DNA protein system we have today.
And the idea here is actually pretty ingenious. You know that classic chicken and egg problem. DNA holds the plans to build proteins, but you need proteins to read the DNA. So which came first? The RNA World tries to solve that. In this scenario, early life used RNA for everything. It can store information and act as an enzyme to get things done. This simpler system could have then, over time, evolved into the more stable DNA world we know.
But the RNA world idea isn't without its own set of pretty big hurdles. First off, just making stable RNA molecules on an early Earth is, chemically speaking, really hard. But the real sticking point for critics is this. It doesn't actually solve the information problem. It just kicks the can down the road. You still have to explain where the information to build that first functional self-replicating RNA molecule came from.
All right, now let's switch gears to a totally different kind of challenge to this whole idea. And this one comes from right inside mainstream evolutionary biology. It's called the neutral theory of molecular evolution, and it questions the very premise of specified information.
This theory, most famously from Moto Kimura, suggests something pretty radical. The idea is that most of the changes in our DNA over time, they're not beneficial or harmful. They're just neutral. They spread through the population by pure random luck. And here's the kicker. This means a huge chunk of the complexity we see in DNA might not be functional, specified information at all. It could just be meaningless noise that's built up over eons.
And there's a really fascinating extension of this called Constructive Neutral Evolution. It shows how complexity can arise completely by accident. Imagine you've got two machine parts, and on their own, they do absolutely nothing useful. Then, just by chance, they happen to link up. Then another random mutation happens that makes each part break unless it's connected to the other one. All of a sudden, you've accidentally created this complex interdependent system that looks like it was designed, but it was all just a series of random non-adaptive steps.
So what we end up with are two fundamentally different ways of looking at the exact same thing. On one hand, you have the specified complexity view. The complexity in DNA is functional, it's a message, and it points to a mind. On the other hand, you have the neutral evolution view. A lot of that same complexity could just be an accident of history, a byproduct of random drift that got locked into place by chance.
So, after all that, where are we? Let's circle all the way back to where we started, to that powerful analogy of DNA as computer code. Because the more you look at it, the more uncanny the similarities become. I mean, seriously, when you start to break down DNA like it's a piece of software, the parallels are just mind-blowing. It's a four-letter or quaternary code. It has data compression features and incredibly complex control logic. And what's maybe most impressive, it contains error correction and repair protocols that are frankly way more sophisticated than anything human engineers have ever designed, making sure the message gets copied almost perfectly every time. And this leads to the really deep philosophical point that the source material we're covering makes. They basically ask, what if we have it all backward? What if information isn't something that comes from matter, but what if information is the thing that organizes matter into life in the first place? They connect this to that ancient philosophical idea of logos, a sort of cosmic intelligence or word that's the foundation of reality itself. And that, at the end of the day, is the question we're left with. We've looked at chemical necessity, pure chance, and different evolutionary pathways, but every path seems to lead right back here. If life is, at its very core, an expression of information, a message written in a molecule, then the biggest question of all is, what or who is the author of that information? That is the signature in the cell that science continues to explore.